Beginning with the 1970s, when the Sixth Pan-African Conference was being contemplated, continental Pan-Africanism had come to mean the exclusive relationship between the African nation states, north and south of the Sahara. Unfortunately, most of these states were in a weakened political and economic position. Consequently, they focused more on government-to-government relationships, which included not only their former colonial masters — this is one of the ironies — they gain independence, they throw them out, and then they have to go back to them politically and economically, but also other countries whose racialism they had chided. So now they have to go back and deal with the United States. Furthermore, the flagrant human rights violations which existed in some African countries undermined their ability to criticize the governments which oppressed the African diaspora. In 1974, Nkrumah's vision of a united Africa had eroded. The nationless Africans in the diaspora were on their own, and a vigorous continental Pan-Africanism lay at the altar of internal affairs. From 1945 onwards, the protests within the African diaspora and the simultaneous shift to the motherland marginalized the role of the diaspora in their newly independent continental Pan-Africa. Following Ghana's independence in 1957, the African diaspora found itself grappling alone with its old issues of political freedom within each Western nation for social cultural independence, self-determination, and global empowerment, which remained at the core of diaspora politics. If centuries earlier, out of Africa's indigenous ethnicities had evolved the multiple ethnicities of the diaspora, then when Africa emerged in all her independent splendor, her position could have been strengthened if she had carved out new paths and policies whereby those she called home could really be home. Surely, given its historic activism in the creation of that independent splendor, the African diaspora had earned more than the right to participate in cultural events. By the way, I just participated in April in the Lagos Badagry conference, Black Heritage Conference, in which there was a discussion about slavery and the slave trade and the role of Africans in the diaspora and on the continent in Nigeria. It was a very fascinating event. Moreover, since the success or failure of the continent's political aspirations directly impacted on the images and reality of the diaspora as it continued to exist in the Western Hemisphere, the diaspora's sense of self-worth and responsibility remain inexplicably tied to the fate of the continent. So when the continent is successful, we can all go around and hold our heads up. When they start talking about Darfur or Mugabe, then we all feel the pressure of race. We all feel the burden of race. But ask now, are all people similarly burdened? Are all the Koreans similarly burdened by the misdeeds of Kim Jong-il? So there is something that happens in the collective psyche to people of African descent globally when we have these miscreants in our own social political environment, that I think maybe goes back to this idea of the psychology of, I would say, not only slavery, enslavement, but also colonialism, okay? I think we see this in the Native American population as well. And we should not forget Fanon, who gave us the roadmap to understanding this. From the 1960s onward, the mounting political and economic pressures facing the newly independent African states forced them to close ranks around the continent's agenda at the very moment when the diaspora, in the position of Malcolm X, raised the American civil rights question to a question of human rights as defined by the UN Charter. You know that that was part of the reason why Malcolm X was being targeted, because he had proposed to raise the question of how people of African descent were treated in the United States as a violation of human rights according to the UN Charter. And that really exacerbated his problem. If if Africa had been in a different position, being member states of the United Nations, there could have been a different type of response to that particular issue. Simultaneously, the diaspora, too, became ensnarled in various regional and national attempts to forestall the erosions of its likewise minimal gains at a time when the continent needed a strong advocate in the West. By the end of the 1960s, the vanguard of nationalism and Pan-Africanism in the diaspora and on the continent had been either assassinated, overthrown, or jailed. Others had died of old age, frustration, or exhaustion, and still others were silenced or abandoned. It is doubtful that this is what Osagyefo had envisioned. The Sixth Pan-African Congress was symptomatic of some of the fundamental contradictions which the 1945 shift to continental Pan-Africanism had failed to consider or address. The failure of the Sixth Pan-African Congress to set any substantial agenda for the remainder of the 20th century is a consequence of an unforeseen balkanization within global Pan-Africanism and a reaction to the superimposition of rabid capitalist ideology, Western culture, and globalization. The multinational corporation held swayed over cultural and political glue that unified global Africa. The question then was not only of double-soul consciousness, but also the place and the role of the diaspora's dual racial identity in the formation of Africa's new national enclaves, had escaped in this euphoria of independence and the challenges of neocolonialism. Africa, Pan-Africanism, and the New World Order. There's a Yoruba proverb that says, if a husband and a wife see a snake, but the wife is the one who kills the snake, it does not matter. What matters is that the snake is dead. There are snakes in our house: poverty, ill health, illiteracy, to name a few, violence in the diaspora and on the continent. As we face the 21st century, we can ill afford to misuse or misdirect one iota of our collective and individual gifts, irrespective of geography and gender. We have to raise the question of the type of Pan-Africanism we want in the 21st, and indeed going into the second decade, the 22nd century. Certainly the question of access between the nation states of the continent and the people of the diaspora will be key to solidifying a working Pan-Africanism where the needs and abilities on both sides can be readily utilized. It seems that this particular issue is closer to the type of a Pan-Africanist vision which Nkrumah saw. And if you read the AU Charter, you see it's very deeply embedded. In fact, they acknowledge that this is closer to what Nkrumah had envisioned.